She noticed him, of course. Everyone did. But she did not stare. She focused on her work, checking details one last time. She had crossed paths with people like him before. Different faces, same energy. Men who believed the room belonged to them simply because it usually did. The meeting room filled quickly. Chairs scraped against the floor as people settled in. Screens lit up. Papers shuffled. The air felt heavier, charged with expectation. She took her seat at the side, close enough to hear everything. Far enough to stay unnoticed. As the meeting began, voices took turns filling the space. Ideas were shared. Plans were discussed. Some spoke with confidence, others with hesitation. She listened carefully, taking mental notes. She could already see small issues in the discussion, gaps others were missing. But she stayed quiet. This was not the moment. Then his voice cut through the room. It was smooth and steady, the kind of voice that demanded attention without effort. He spoke with ease, making comments that sounded clever and assured. People nodded along. Some leaned forward, eager to agree. He controlled the rhythm of the conversation without trying. At first, his words were harmless. Observations, opinions, light humor. But as the discussion continued, his tone slowly changed. He began to challenge points, interrupting others. Brushing aside suggestions with a smile that felt polite on the surface, but dismissive underneath. She noticed the shift, before most did. When the conversation touched on an area she had worked on extensively, her focus sharpened. She knew the details better than anyone in the room. She had spent weeks analyzing, preparing, and double-checking. She expected questions. She was ready for them. What she did not expect was the way he looked in her direction. It was brief, almost casual. A glance that lingered just long enough to feel intentional. He paused mid-sentence, then smiled. "And who handled this part?" he asked, his voice light. A few heads turned toward her. She felt the attention land on her shoulders like weight. Still, she stayed calm. She spoke clearly and simply, stating her role without exaggeration. No emotion. Just truth. There was a short silence. Then he laughed. It was not loud, but it was enough. "Well," he said, still smiling, "that explains a few things." The room reacted immediately. A few people chuckled. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others avoided looking at her altogether. No one spoke up. The comment was subtle. It could almost pass as harmless. But she understood it instantly. It was meant to place her beneath him, to suggest incompetence without stating it outright. A small cut, delivered publicly. Her face remained steady, but inside, something tightened. Moments like this were not new to her. She had experienced them in different forms throughout her life. The quiet dismissal, the hidden insult, the assumption that she did not belong. Each time it tested her resolve. She took a slow breath. He continued speaking, expanding on his point, indirectly questioning the work without addressing the facts. His words carried authority, and people listened. The earlier confidence in the room shifted toward him completely. She felt the familiar pressure to disappear, to stay silent, to accept the moment and move on. That was what most people in her position did. It was safer, but she also felt something else, a quiet certainty. She knew the truth. She knew the work. She knew the facts were on her side, and she knew that if she stayed silent now, the story would be written without her. Still, she did not rush. She listened carefully as he spoke, noting every incorrect assumption, every overlooked detail. She stayed composed, even as the tension grew inside her. She had learned that reacting too quickly only played into moments like this. The meeting continued, but the atmosphere had changed. A subtle discomfort lingered. Some people glanced at her briefly, then looked away. Others seemed unsure how to respond. The powerful man leaned back in his chair, relaxed, confident that his words had landed exactly where he intended. He believed the moment was over. She knew it was just beginning. As the discussion moved forward, she prepared herself. Not with anger, not with pride, but with clarity. She reminded herself why she was there, why she had worked so hard, why her voice mattered, even if the room did not expect it. Her hands rested calmly on the table. Her breathing slowed. Her thoughts sharpened. She was ready not to fight him, but to stand firm. And no one in that room yet understood just how big a mistake he had made. The meeting moved on, but the feeling in the room never returned to normal. What had been calm and professional now felt tight, like everyone was holding their breath without realizing it. People spoke, but their voices were lower. They avoided eye contact with her, as if silence could erase what had just happened. The powerful man continued to lead the discussion. He spoke with confidence, leaning back in his chair, crossing his arms at times, nodding as if every point made only confirmed what he already believed. He had the habit of repeating others' ideas in his own words, polishing them just enough to sound smarter. Each time he did, people nodded in approval. She noticed everything. She noticed how he skipped over key facts. She noticed how he simplified things that were not simple at all. She noticed how others followed along because it was easier than questioning him. She wrote nothing down, but her mind was busy sorting through details, lining up truth against assumption. Then it happened again. Someone asked a question related to her work. A fair question, actually. One she had expected. Before she could answer, the powerful man raised his hand slightly, cutting her off without even looking at her. "That's already been addressed," he said. "Though I'm not sure how thoroughly." He smiled again, the same calm smile. It was smooth, controlled, and carefully aimed. A few people laughed softly, unsure whether they should. Others glanced between the two of them. This time the embarrassment was clearer. Less hidden, she felt heat rise in her chest. Not anger exactly, but something close. A deep discomfort mixed with disbelief. He wasn't just questioning the work now. He was questioning her in front of everyone, bit by bit. Testing how far he could go, she could feel the old instinct pushing at her. Stay quiet. Let it pass. Don't draw attention. That instinct had protected her many times before, but it had also cost her moments she never got back. She waited. The person who had asked the question looked confused. "I was hoping for more detail," they said carefully. The powerful man shrugged. "Well, with all due respect, I don't think we need to spend too much time on it. There are bigger issues to focus on." He turned slightly in his chair, signaling the discussion should move on. That was when she realized something important. He wasn't listening. He had already decided she wasn't worth hearing. That realization changed the way she felt. The embarrassment faded, replaced by clarity. This wasn't about a mistake or misunderstanding. This was about control. About reminding everyone who mattered and who didn't. She straightened slightly in her chair. "I can explain," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. It cut through the room in a way that surprised even her. The powerful man paused. Slowly he turned to look at her. His expression was polite, but there was something else beneath it now. A hint of annoyance. "Go ahead," he said, gesturing with his hand as if granting permission. Every eye turned toward her. She felt the weight of the moment settle in. This was the point where things could go very wrong or very right. She could feel her heartbeat, steady but strong. She took a breath and began. She spoke simply. No long sentences. No complicated words. She explained the reasoning behind the work, step by step. She addressed the question directly, filling in gaps that had been ignored. As she spoke, the room grew quieter. She didn't rush. She didn't apologize. She didn't look at him for approval. She spoke the truth. Halfway through, the powerful man shifted in his chair. He tapped his fingers lightly on the table. Once he tried to interrupt, but she continued without raising her voice. Not in a rude way. Just steady, calm, and focused. People began to nod. Not everyone, but enough. She saw it in their faces. The surprise. The realization. Some leaned forward. Some stopped checking their phones. A few exchanged quick looks with each other. When she finished, she stopped speaking and waited. There was a brief silence. Then someone asked another question. This time, they looked directly at her. She answered without hesitation. Then another question came. And another. The flow of the room shifted. The powerful man smiled again, but it was tighter now. less relaxed. He cleared his throat. "Yes, well," he said, "that's one way to look at it." The phrase was meant to dismiss her without openly disagreeing. A way to regain control without starting a conflict. But it didn't work the way he expected, because now people had heard her. The meeting continued, but the balance had changed. He spoke less. When he did speak, he was more careful. Still confident, still polished, but no longer untouchable. She stayed engaged, answering questions when asked, offering input when appropriate. She didn't push. She didn't challenge him directly. She didn't need to. She arrived early, like she always did. The building was still quiet, the lights half on, the air carrying that calm feeling that only existed before everyone else showed up. She liked these moments. They gave her time to breathe, to prepare her mind before the day demanded everything from her again. She placed her bag under the desk, straightened a few papers, and reviewed her notes carefully. She had learned long ago that preparation was her shield in places like this. Her job was not glamorous. It did not come with applause or special treatment. She worked behind the scenes, making sure things ran smoothly while others took the credit. Most people barely noticed her, and she had grown used to that. Still, she took pride in doing things right. She believed effort mattered, even when no one was watching. The environment around her was one where power spoke loudly. Titles carried weight. People measured each other by influence, connections, and the kind of doors they could open with a single phone call. Those without status learned quickly to stay quiet. She had learned that lesson too, but she never let it shrink her sense of self. She knew who she was, even if the world didn't care to ask. That morning, there was a big event scheduled, a meeting that brought important people together. Everyone had been talking about it for days. The room would be full of decision makers, people who shaped outcomes and controlled opportunities. She was there because her role required it, not because anyone expected her voice to matter. Still, she prepared as if it would. As the hours passed, the building grew louder. Footsteps echoed in the halls. Voices blended into a steady hum. She watched people greet each other with wide smiles and firm handshakes. Some laughed louder than necessary. Some spoke carefully, choosing words that would impress the right ears. It was a familiar performance. Then he arrived. The mood shifted almost instantly. Conversations paused, then restarted in a softer tone. People straightened their posture. Someone rushed to greet him. He had that effect on rooms. His presence alone carried authority. Years of power, success, and public recognition followed him like a shadow. He was confident, comfortable, and fully aware of his influence. People listened when he spoke, even when he said nothing important. His opinions were treated like facts. His jokes were always laughed at. His approval mattered more than most would admit. The truth did that on its own. As the meeting neared its end, the tension remained, but it had shifted direction. What once felt like her being on display now felt like quiet observation of him. People noticed things they hadn't before. How often he avoided details. How quickly he dismissed others. How uncomfortable he seemed when challenged calmly. When the meeting finally ended, chairs moved back and people stood up. Conversations started again, but they were different now. Softer, more thoughtful. The powerful man stood as well, gathering his things. As he passed by her, he paused. "Good explanation," he said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Next time, just be quicker." It sounded like advice, but it wasn't. It was a reminder. A subtle attempt to put himself back above her. She met his eyes. "I was clear," she said. Nothing more. For a moment he looked surprised. Then he nodded once and walked away. As people filtered out of the room, a few stopped by her seat. One thanked her for the explanation. Another said it helped clarify things. Someone else simply smiled and nodded. These were small moments, but they mattered. She gathered her things slowly, letting the room empty. Her hands trembled slightly now that the pressure was gone. She let herself feel it. The stress, the release, the quiet pride. She hadn't planned to speak up. Not at first. But once she did, she realized how tired she was of shrinking herself to make others comfortable. Outside the meeting room, the hallway buzzed with quiet conversation. She walked toward her desk, her steps steady. She felt different, not because she had won anything, but because she had chosen herself. She knew this wasn't over. People like him didn't forget moments like this. They didn't like being questioned, especially by someone they believed was beneath them. She could feel it. This was only the middle of the story, but she was no longer afraid of. What came next? She had seen something important in that room. Not just about him, but about herself. And once you see that, there's no going back. The days after the meeting felt different, even though nothing on the surface had changed. The same halls, the same desks, the same routines, but underneath it all, there was a quiet shift. Like something had been set in motion and could not be stopped. She noticed it first in small ways. People who used to pass her desk without a glance now paused to say hello. Some asked quick questions about work. Others asked her opinion, then listened carefully to the answer. No one made a big deal out of it, but she felt the difference. Respect often arrived quietly. She kept doing her job the same way she always had. She showed up early. She stayed focused. She prepared. She didn't brag or bring up the meeting. She didn't need to. The moment had already spoken for itself. The powerful man, however, had changed. He no longer ignored her. But he didn't treat her warmly either. When their paths crossed, his nod was short, his smile thin. In meetings, he was careful around her, choosing his words more slowly when the discussion touched areas she knew well. He still held authority, still commanded attention. But the ease was gone. She could sense his awareness. He was watching her now. At first, that made her uneasy. Being unseen had its own comfort. But she reminded herself that fear was not a signal to step back. It was a signal to stay steady. Another meeting was scheduled a week later. Smaller, but still important. She reviewed her notes the night before, not because she expected trouble, but because preparation had become second nature. If questions came, she wanted to be ready. When she walked into the room, she felt the familiar tension return. The powerful man was already there, speaking quietly with two others. He looked up briefly as she entered, then looked away. She took her seat. The meeting began smoothly. Updates were shared. Progress was discussed. She listened closely, as she always did. When her turn came to speak, she delivered her points clearly and calmly. No one interrupted her. Then the questions started at first. They were fair clarifications, follow-ups. She answered each one with patience. Then the tone shifted. The powerful man leaned forward slightly. "I'm curious," he said, his voice calm, "why this approach was chosen instead of the one we discussed earlier." The question itself wasn't wrong, but she recognized it for what it was, a test. Not of the work, but of her. She didn't rush to answer. She explained her reasoning step by step, referring to data, past results, and practical limits. She spoke plainly without trying to impress. She focused on facts, not emotion. He nodded slowly as she spoke, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he tilted his head slightly. "I see," he said. Though some might say that was a risk, some might. She felt the familiar pressure again, the subtle attempt to create doubt without saying anything directly. She took a breath. "All decisions involve risk," she said. This one reduced it. Her voice was steady. Her posture relaxed. For a moment, the room was silent. Then someone else spoke up. "I agree," they said. "The explanation makes sense." Another nodded. "The results support it." The powerful man leaned back in his chair. He smiled. But this time, there was no humor in it. "Well," he said, "as long as we're aligned moving forward." The meeting continued, but the air had shifted again. Not in her favor or his. Just clearer. More honest. After the meeting, she returned to her desk feeling tired but grounded. Standing firm took energy. She felt it in her shoulders, in the slow exhale she released once she sat down. Later that afternoon, she was asked to join a smaller discussion. Unexpected, but not unwelcome. She listened, contributed when needed, left with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. That evening, as she packed up to leave, she noticed the powerful man standing near the exit. He looked deep in thought. As she approached, he looked up. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. She paused. "Yes," she said. They stood a short distance apart. "No audience. No performance. I want to be clear," he said. "I expect efficiency. When I ask questions, it's about moving things forward." She met his gaze. "So do I," she said. He studied her for a moment, as if seeing her for the first time without the filter of assumption. "Good," he said. "Then we understand each other." Maybe they did. Maybe they did. She nodded and walked away. That night, she reflected on how close she had come to staying silent. How easy it would have been to let the moment pass. She thought about all the times she had done exactly that in the past. The opportunities she had missed. The respect she had delayed, claiming she didn't regret her choices now, but she knew this story wasn't about a single meeting or a single man. It was about something deeper. About what happened when someone decided they would no longer accept being reduced. The weeks that followed brought more responsibility, more visibility, more moments where her voice mattered. With each one, she grew more confident, not because others approved, but because she trusted herself. And the powerful man? He remained powerful. He still commanded rooms, but he no longer underestimated her. And that change, small as it seemed, mattered more than any apology ever could. She understood something now that she hadn't before. Power didn't always shout. Sometimes it stood quietly, spoke clearly, and refused to step back. And once that kind of power is seen, it cannot be unseen. An important public review was scheduled, one that involved people from outside the organization, partners, observers, and decision-makers who did not attend the regular meetings. This was the kind of event where reputations were shaped quietly, where a single moment could change how someone was seen for years. She knew the powerful man would be there. More than that, she knew he would want control of the room. In the days leading up to it, she stayed focused. She reviewed everything carefully, not just her own work, but how it connected to the bigger picture. She asked questions. She checked details twice. She didn't do this out of fear. She did it because she respected herself enough to be ready. On the morning of the review, she arrived early again. The room was large, brighter than the usual meeting spaces. Long tables, microphones, screens on the walls. She set her materials down neatly and took a seat near the side, as usual. People arrived in groups, talking quietly. Some greeted her warmly now. Others still looked surprised to see her there, as if they hadn't yet updated their image of who she was. The powerful man arrived last. He walked in with confidence, greeted several people by name, and took a seat near the center. He didn't look at her at first. When he finally did, it was quick, controlled, unreadable. The review began. At first, everything followed the plan. Presentations moved forward. Numbers were shared. Updates were given. She listened closely, noting where things were accurate and where they weren't. Then the discussion reached a critical section, one that involved decisions he had pushed for earlier, decisions she had questioned quietly at the time. He stood to speak. His voice filled the room easily. He spoke with certainty, explaining the choices made and the reasons behind them. On the surface, it sounded solid, confident, convincing, but she knew what was missing. He skipped over key risks. He avoided mentioning warnings that had been raised. He framed outcomes in a way that shifted responsibility away from himself. As he spoke, she felt the familiar tension rise. Not fear, but awareness. This was the moment. When he finished, the room responded with polite nods and murmurs of approval. Someone thanked him for the clarity. Then a question came from the back of the room. A calm voice, neutral in tone. What alternatives were considered before this direction was chosen? The powerful man smiled slightly. Several, he said, but none offered the same level of efficiency. The answer was smooth, incomplete. She felt her hands tighten slightly, then relax. She took a breath. She raised her hand. The room stilled. The person leading the review hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Go ahead. She stood slowly. She didn't rush. She didn't look at the powerful man. She looked at the room. There were alternatives, she said. One of them reduced risk significantly, but it required more time. The powerful man turned toward her. She continued. That option was discussed. Concerns were raised about long-term impact. Those concerns were documented. The room grew quieter. She wasn't accusing. She wasn't emotional. She was careful, precise, and calm. Someone asked, were those concerns addressed? She met their eyes. They were noted, she said. But the decision moved forward without changes. The powerful man shifted in his seat. He stood again, smiling, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. With respect, he said, we can't slow progress every time someone has a concern. The word someone hung in the air. She nodded once. That's true, she said. But when concerns are based on data, they deserve weight. There it was. The room reacted, not loudly, but visibly. People leaned forward. Some exchanged looks. Pens paused mid-note. She didn't stop. She explained the data. Simply, clearly. She showed where risks had increased and where early signs were already appearing. She didn't blame. She didn't point fingers. She let the facts speak. The powerful man interrupted. I think we're getting off track, he said. The person leading the review raised a hand. Let her finish. That was the moment, she finished calmly. Ending with one sentence that landed quietly but firmly, my goal was to protect the outcome, not slow it. Silence followed, not awkward silence, thoughtful silence. Then questions came, not defensive ones, honest ones. People wanted clarity. They wanted detail. And she answered. The powerful man sat back down. He said nothing. For the rest of the review, the balance was gone. Not taken by her, but lost by him. His authority didn't disappear, but it cracked. Just enough for others to see through it. When the session ended, people stood slowly, still processing what they had heard. Several approached her. They thanked her for speaking clearly. One said they appreciated her courage. Another said the information was important. She listened, nodded, thanked them back. She didn't smile too much. She didn't celebrate. She understood the weight of what had happened. As the room emptied, the powerful man remained seated. Eventually, he stood and walked toward her. This wasn't necessary, he said quietly. She looked at him. It was. He held her gaze longer this time. There was no anger in his eyes now. Just calculation. You made your point, he said. I made the facts clear, she replied. He exhaled slowly. You embarrassed me. She shook her head gently. No, I answered a question. He didn't respond. For a moment, it seemed like he might say more. Then he nodded once and walked away. She gathered her things and left the room, her legs feeling light and heavy at the same time. She didn't feel victorious. She felt honest. That evening, as she sat alone, the moment replayed in her mind. Not with regret, not with pride, but with clarity. She had crossed a line she once feared, and nothing terrible had happened. Instead, something had settled. She knew there would be consequences. There always were when power was challenged, but she also knew something else now. Silence had never protected her. Speaking calmly had, and whatever came next, she would face it the same way she had faced. Everything else, prepared, steady, unwilling to shrink. The days after the review felt quieter than she expected. Not calmer, just quieter. The kind of quiet that comes after something important has happened, and everyone is still deciding how to react to it. She returned to her routine. Early mornings, careful preparation, steady work. On the surface, nothing had changed. But she could feel it beneath every conversation, every pause. Every look that lasted a second longer than before. People were thinking. Some avoided her now, unsure where she stood. Others seemed more open, more honest. A few sought her out, asking questions they had never asked before. Not just about work, but about process, about decisions. about why things were done a certain way, she answered the same way she always had, simply, clearly, without trying to impress. The powerful man kept his distance. He no longer challenged her openly. He no longer dismissed her either. In meetings, he listened when she spoke. He didn't agree with everything, but he didn't interrupt. When questions were asked, he let her answer them. It wasn't respect in the warm sense. It was acknowledgement, and that was enough. One afternoon, she was called into a private discussion with senior leadership. No warning, no explanation. Just a short message, asking her to come by. She walked in calmly, though her heart beat faster than usual. Experience had taught her not to assume the worst or the best. Only to be present. They thanked her for coming. They spoke about the review, about the clarity she had brought, about the importance of honest information. No one mentioned embarrassment. No one mentioned conflict. Then they asked her a simple question. Would you be willing to take on more responsibility? She didn't answer right away. She thought about the past, about how often she had waited to be noticed, about how long she had believed her work should speak for itself, about how close she had come to staying silent when it mattered most. Yes, she said. If it helps the work, it did. With time, her role expanded, slowly at first, then more clearly. She was included earlier in discussions, asked to review plans before they moved forward, trusted with decisions that once would have gone to someone louder or more visible. She never changed who she was. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't compete for attention. She didn't turn into someone else to fit the space. She simply stayed steady. The powerful man watched all of this unfold. She could feel it, but he never confronted her again. He adjusted instead. His tone softened in meetings. He asked more questions. He took fewer shortcuts. Others noticed. Not because he announced it, but because the room felt different when he spoke. Less dominating. More measured. One day, weeks later, they found themselves walking out at the same time, side by side, without an audience. You were right, he said suddenly. She stopped walking. About what? She asked. He hesitated. Just briefly. About the risk. She nodded once. I know. He looked at her, then away. I should have listened sooner. It wasn't an apology. But it wasn't nothing. She didn't press him. She didn't respond with a lecture or a smile. She simply said, We all learn. They walked the rest of the way in silence. That evening, she reflected on how far things had come. Not just at work, but inside her. She no longer questioned whether she belonged in the room. She no longer waited for permission to speak when something mattered. She had learned that confidence didn't come from winning arguments or proving others wrong. It came from trusting herself enough to stand still under pressure. People began to tell her story in small ways. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. She speaks up when it matters. She's solid. She sees things early. That was enough. Months later, a new hire joined the team. Quiet, careful, clearly capable, but hesitant to speak. She noticed it right away. In one meeting, when the new hire started to talk and then stopped, unsure, she waited. She didn't fill the silence. She looked at them and nodded gently. Go on, she said. They did. After the meeting, the new hire thanked her. I wasn't sure anyone wanted to hear it, she smiled. They do. And in that moment, she understood something fully for the first time. This was the real outcome, not the meetings, not the recognition, not even the shift in power. It was the way standing firm had opened space for others to do the same. She had once believed power belonged only to those who demanded it. She knew better now. Real power was quieter. It listened. It spoke when necessary and stayed silent when it wasn't. And it never needed to embarrass anyone to exist. The man who had tried to do that learned his lesson the hard way. Not through punishment or shame, but through exposure to truth he could no longer ignore. She moved forward with her work, her life, her purpose, without needing to look back. She hadn't set out to make a point. She had simply refused to. disappear, and that had made all the difference. Time moved forward. But the impact of what had happened did not fade. It settled into the place like a quiet rule everyone understood, but no one needed to say out loud. Things were done differently now. Not perfectly. Not magically. Just more honestly. She felt it in the rhythm of her days. Meetings started on time. Questions were asked earlier instead of being saved for the end. People spoke with less performance and more purpose. There was still pressure, still disagreement, still moments of tension, but the fear that once filled the room had softened. She was part of that shift. Even if she never claimed credit for it, her responsibilities continued to grow. With each new task, she approached it the same way she always had. Careful, thoughtful, prepared. She made mistakes sometimes, like anyone else. When she did, she owned them. That honesty earned more trust than perfection ever could. People came to her not because she had authority over them, but because they felt safe speaking to her. They knew she would listen. They knew she would tell the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. That kind of trust changes places. The powerful man remained part of the system, but his role had shifted. He was still influential, still respected for his experience, but no longer unquestioned. He adapted, whether by choice or necessity. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the space he once controlled alone now belonged to more voices. She noticed he spoke, less about himself and more about outcomes. Less about speed and more about impact. Sometimes he even asked for input directly, something no one would have believed. Months earlier, they were not friends. They didn't need to be. What existed between them now was balance. One afternoon, a situation came up that tested everything again. A proposal was moving forward too quickly. Old habits were pushing it ahead without full review. The pressure came from outside, strong and urgent. People looked to her, not officially, not openly. But the glances were there. She reviewed the proposal carefully. She saw the risk immediately. Not dramatic, but serious enough to matter later. In the meeting that followed, she spoke early. "I think we should pause," she said. "Just long enough to address this." The room stilled. The powerful man looked at her, then at the others. For a moment, she wondered if things might slip back into old patterns. If speed would be chosen over sense again. Then he nodded. "Let's hear it," said she explained. Simply, clearly. No emotion. No drama. The decision was made to pause. Later that day, someone stopped her in the hallway. "That used to be impossible," they said quietly. She knew what they meant. At home that evening, she thought about how different her life felt now. Not louder. Not easier. Just more solid. She slept better. She trusted herself more. She no longer replayed conversations in her head. Wondering if she should have spoken, she had learned when to speak, and when not to. The change reached beyond work. She noticed it in other parts of her life too. In conversations where she once nodded to avoid conflict, she now asked questions. In moments where she once shrank, she stood still. Not rigid, just present. One day, she was invited to speak at a small internal session. Nothing formal. Just a discussion about decision-making and responsibility. She hesitated before accepting. She wasn't someone who enjoyed attention, but she said yes. She didn't prepare a speech. She didn't write notes. She spoke from experience. She talked about listening, about asking hard questions early, about how silence could feel safe, but often came at a cost. She didn't mention the powerful man. She didn't mention the review. She didn't need to. People understood. Afterward, someone asked her, "Were you ever afraid to speak up?" She smiled softly. "Yes," she said. "Many times." "What changed?" they asked. She thought for a moment. "I realized fear doesn't go away when you stay quiet," she said. "It just waits for the next time." It stayed with people. Weeks passed, then months. The story became less about a moment and more about a standard. New people entered the environment and learned quickly how things worked. They learned that questions were welcome. That clarity mattered. That power did not excuse carelessness. She continued her work without needing recognition. She didn't chase promotions or praise. But when opportunities came, she didn't step aside either. She accepted them with calm confidence. One afternoon, she saw the powerful man speaking with someone new. The way he spoke had changed. He listened more than he talked, nodded. He asked follow-up questions. She watched from a distance, not with pride, but with understanding. People can change when they are forced to see clearly. Not everyone does, but some do. As for her, she no longer thought of herself as someone who had been embarrassed or challenged. She thought of herself as someone who had reached a line and decided not to step back. That decision had reshaped her path. She didn't know where it would lead next. She didn't need to. She trusted that whatever came, she would meet it the same way she had met everything else. With preparation, with honesty, with quiet strength, and if one day she found herself in a position of real power, she already knew what she would not do. She would never use it to make someone smaller, because she knew exactly how that felt, and she also knew what could happen when someone chose not to accept it. The lesson lived on, not as a warning, but as an example, and that was enough. The story did not end with recognition or a title. It continued in quieter ways. It's a kind that only showed themselves over time. A year passed. The place no longer felt the same as it once had. It was still busy, still demanding, still full of pressure. But the tone had changed. Conversations were more direct. Decisions were questioned earlier. Mistakes were discussed. Instead of hidden, she had become part of that change without ever setting out to lead it. People trusted her judgment. Not because she pushed it forward, but because it had proven steady. When problems surfaced, they came to her early. When things went well, they moved on without drama. She was comfortable with both. One morning, she was asked to review a situation involving a conflict between two teams. Nothing dramatic, but tense enough to stall progress. She listened to both sides carefully. She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush them. When they finished, she spoke. "You're both right about different things," she said, "and wrong about the same one." They laughed lightly, surprised. She helped them find common ground. Not by forcing agreement, but by clarifying what actually mattered. They left calmer than they arrived. Later that day, she sat alone for a moment, reflecting on how natural this had become. There was a time when she would have avoided moments like that, a time when she would have thought it wasn't her place. She smiled at the thought. Place was something people took when they stopped waiting. The powerful man was still around. Though his presence no longer filled the space the way it once had, he was respected, but no longer feared. He had learned, slowly and quietly, that fear created distance, not results. One afternoon, he stopped by her desk. "I'm stepping back soon," he said. She looked up, surprised. "I didn't know. Not many do yet," he replied. "I wanted to tell you." "Hush." She nodded. "Thank you." He hesitated, then added, "You changed things here. More than you realize." She didn't answer right away. "Others did too," she said finally. He smiled faintly. "You were the start." He walked away, leaving her with a strange mix of emotions. Not pride, not victory. Just closure. As time went on, new leaders emerged. Some learned quickly, others needed reminders. She gave those reminders calmly, the same way she had once needed them herself. She became someone people watched. Not because she demanded attention, but because she handled pressure without noise. When things went wrong, she didn't panic. When things went right, she didn't boast. Her life outside of work reflected the same calm strength. She set clearer boundaries. She chose her words carefully. She stopped apologizing for things that didn't require it. She listened more than she spoke, but when she spoke, it mattered. One evening, she met someone from her past. An old acquaintance who remembered her as quiet, reserved, easy to overlook. "You've changed," they said. She thought about it. "No," she replied gently. "I stopped hiding." That truth stayed with her. There were still hard days. Still moments of doubt. Still nights when she questioned her choices. Growth didn't erase struggle. It just made it honest. But she no longer confused discomfort with danger. Years later, a young woman joined the organization. Intelligent, capable, clearly unsure of herself. She reminded her of someone, of herself. In a meeting, the young woman hesitated while speaking, her voice trailing off when interrupted. The room moved on quickly, as rooms often do. She waited. When there was a pause, she spoke. "I'd like to hear the rest of that thought." The young woman looked up, surprised, then continued. Afterward, she approached her quietly. "Thank you," she said. "I didn't think it was important," she smiled. "If you're thinking it, it's important." That moment mattered more than any recognition she had ever received, because that was the real legacy, not the meetings, not the decisions, not the moments of tension. It was the space created for others to stand, without fear. She understood now that power didn't need to be loud to be lasting. It didn't need to embarrass or dominate. It only needed to be honest and consistent. The man who had once tried to shrink her had made a mistake. Yes, but the bigger truth was this. She had chosen not to shrink. That choice had changed her path, quietly, permanently. And long after people forgot the details of what happened, they would remember how the place felt. More open, more grounded, more human. That was enough.